rearrange the shelves, I'm standing up, we're trying new things here. Hey guys, it's Casey, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of my favorite books of all time. So my channel is obviously still pretty new, and while you guys have gotten kind of a taste of what kinds of things I read through my wrap-ups and my TBRs, I wanted to give you guys like a list of things that are like my all-time favorite books, just so you guys can get an idea of the things I've really enjoyed. So these aren't going to be in any particular order. I struggled to make a fully ranked list of all of these, except for the top two are definitely the top two. So the book I'm going to start with is probably the one that's most outside of my general reading tastes, and that's going to be Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. So Turtles All the Way Down is about a girl named Asa as she works to solve this mystery of this fugitive billionaire with a couple of her friends. But that's very much the bare bones basic surface plot of this book, and that surface plot is pretty fun and it keeps you engaged throughout the story. However, that's not why I love this book. I love this book because it is such a raw and real depiction of anxiety and OCD. This felt like one of the truest depictions of anxiety that I had seen in pretty much anything that I've ever read, and I thought it was incredibly done. Now I know some people when they see a John Green book are immediately kind of turned away from it, but I promise you this one is worth a read. While it does have some of the same sort of tropes and ideas as some other John Green books do, you get a little bit of that quirky best friend and the kind of same setup. Again, that's not what is at the core of this book, and that's not really what this book is about. Now, John Green himself has said that this book is semi-autobiographical in that the thoughts that Asa has in this book are extremely reflective of his own experiences with anxiety and OCD, and you can really tell that when you're reading it. I think it shines through so well. There are parts of this that are hard to read and almost anxiety-inducing because they feel so true to the experiences. So even though I'm not a huge reader of contemporary or young adult contemporary, this is definitely on my favorites list of all time. So the next one I have is a little bit more back in my wheelhouse, and that is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. Specifically, it's really the whole Raven Cycle series, but I wanted to just give it one slot. So The Raven Cycle is a young adult fantasy, but mostly paranormal book about this group of friends. This follows our main character, Blue Sargent, who lives with this eclectic family of psychics, and has always been told that if she kisses her true love, he will die. And Blue has a rule that she pretty firmly believes in, which is don't associate with the Raven Boys. And Raven Boys are the boys who go to Aglenby, which is a very fancy private school. Now at the very beginning of the book, Blue is helping her mother Maura on St. Mark's Eve. At this time, they are sort of observing and helping the passing of the spirits of the people who are going to die within the next year. And as they are doing so, one of the spirits, a teenage boy, actually speaks to Blue and says his name. And of course, this ends up leading Blue to break her rule about the Raven Boys when she comes across that boy and a group of his friends at her job. Blue finds herself drawn to this boy, Gansey, and ends up going on sort of this strange adventure. Gansey is obsessed with finding this dead Welsh king, which is supposedly buried in this town of Henrietta, Virginia. And I absolutely adore this series. I love all of the characters, I love the dynamics between them. This series and a couple of series on this list actually have such a strong found family element, and I absolutely adore that about them. I think on Goodreads I've given all 4 of the books in this series 5 stars, and I actually reread it again this spring. And while they probably don't all technically deserve 5 stars, the nostalgia piece of it for me is just such that I can't not give them all 5 stars. So I read this book for the first time a few years ago. It was back when I was kind of in my big reading slump when I was in undergrad. I hadn't read anything that I really enjoyed in a long time, and one of my friends was like, you have to read these books. And I flew through all 4 of them in the span of a week. I was up all night reading them. I adored these books. The plot is very kind of whimsical, but also very dark in places, and I felt very propelled through the story in that sense. The thing that kept me reading this, though, was the characters. I loved all of the people in sort of the main core squad, but also all of the side characters were really good. I never felt like there was anybody who was super one-dimensional. I felt like everybody was very fleshed out and interesting to read about, and I care about them so much, and I love this series. So the individual entries of this series have their ups and downs. There are some that I like a lot more than others, and some pieces that I wish were done differently, but that's true of most like long-running series. But as a whole, these 4 books are so special to me. I absolutely adore these, and these definitely have a spot on this list. Okay, so I know that I've said that my favorite genre is fantasy, and I do think that that's true. However, the next 3 entries on this list, which are pretty firmly my top 3, are sci-fi? So I don't know what that means for me and my whole identity, but that's okay. So the next one I'm going to talk about is actually a sci-fi graphic novel series, and that is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. So Saga is about these two people, Alana and Marco, who are from different planets who are on opposing sides of this war. So this series starts off with Alana giving birth to their child Hazel, who sort of narrates the entire series. So primarily this series follows this family as they are on the run from both of their governments and bounty hunters because they don't want it getting out that two people from opposing sides of this war fell in love and had a child. So I've been following this series since I think around 2015, so pretty early in its run. So I have the 6th edition bind-ups of the first couple, but here you can also kind of see it. I have over there all of the single issues from like 20 something on. So this series is beautiful, dramatic, wonderful. I love it. The art is gorgeous. I love it. Like, it's so well done. I absolutely adore it. So this series has 54 single issues out, and recently they came out with a big compendium of all 54 of those issues that you can get. Highly recommend that you do. And Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples have said that this series is kind of at its halfway point, that there's going to be another sort of 50 issues after this. And the series has been on hiatus for I think just about 2 years now, and I am dying for it to return. The plot of this series takes a lot of very interesting twists and turns, and it explores a lot of really difficult topics and themes, one of which of course is family and found family, like a lot of other ones on this list. It explores topics of marriage and growing up and identity and what that means, and it's so good. While the broad story focuses on this family, there is a very large cast of characters that we are introduced to and that help this family along their way or hinder this family. And all of the characters are so interesting. They all come with their own problems, their own motives, their own interests, and it's so fascinating to read about all of them. This series does have pretty graphic depictions of violence and sex on page, which obviously I'm not going to show you that. So do be warned about that going in, but if that's something that you're interested in or willing to read, I think this is an incredible graphic novel series. Even if you've never really read comic books or graphic novels before, I think this is a pretty good one to pick up. I'd read barely any before I started getting really into Saga, and I think that it was a pretty good introduction. It didn't go over my head, it wasn't too complicated for me, and this has helped propel me into a love for graphic novels that I really want to cultivate and expand because I think they're such a good medium and I just love looking at all the pretty pictures. Maybe someday this series will come off hiatus. As soon as they announce that this series comes off hiatus, I am going to do a whole reread of the entire series. I'll vlog the whole thing, I don't care, I'm so excited. So the next one on this list is one I've talked about before on this channel, but that is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. So this is the only book on this list right now that I read this year. So this book primarily follows Rosemary Harper as she joins the crew of the Wayfarer, which is a tunneling ship, as they prepare to go on one of the most important jobs of their career. So this book chronicles the daily life of the individuals on the ship, focuses a lot on the relationships between the crew members. You really come to know every single one of them, and I think there's something so special about this. This book has a plot, and the plot is interesting, but this book is primarily driven by the characters. A lot of this book is like little snippets, almost like slice of life moments from their journey to this job, and while some of them are very action-packed, a lot of them are just like deep character moments and relationship moments that are so fascinating to read about. I really enjoyed Becky Chambers' writing style. I felt deeply connected to all of these characters. They were all so well written, so while I didn't like all of them as people, I definitely thought that every single one of them was interesting to read about and I wanted to learn more about them. You really come to know the crew by the end of this book just as Rosemary does. This book tackles a lot of themes, such as gender, identity, sexuality, moral relativism, and most importantly to me, found family. So as you might have noticed, a lot of the books on this list are character driven, and that is something that is really important to me in my books. I really love to connect with the characters, and this is the best example of that on this entire list. As soon as I finished this book, I wanted to pick it up and reread it, but I'm gonna wait for at least a year afterwards before I reread it. This book was just really fun and also heartbreaking and beautiful and wonderful, and I cried and I laughed and I love it and everyone should read it. So I said this wasn't in order, but this and then the #1 book on this list are definitely the top 2. They might even be interchangeable, but since I read this one so recently, I'm gonna go ahead and stick it in the #2 slot. But this really might just be my new favorite book of all time and forever, full stop. It's so good. And this book also is part of a series that are loosely connected. They don't follow the same characters throughout, like it doesn't follow the crew of the Wayfarer every single time, but they are all connected in this greater world. And I haven't actually read the second or third book in the series. I just picked up A Closed and Common Orbit, which is the second one. and I'm going to read it within the next couple of months. But I really wanted to wait till the emotional impact from this book wore off before I moved on to the next one. And it just never did. Like, I'm still emotionally impacted by this book. I still have so many feelings when I go to talk about it. So it doesn't seem like that's gonna go away anytime soon. So I'm just gonna go ahead and read the next one soon because I've heard that it's also very good and I'm so excited. And now the number one book on my list, my favorite book of all time, probably, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. So this is a classic, absurdist sci-fi story that follows Arthur Dent, who wakes up one morning to find a bulldozer is about to demolish his house, so he goes down to the local pub to mourn it. And while he's there, he runs into Ford Prefect, who is a friend of his. It turns out Ford Prefect is not from Earth and warns Arthur Dent that they need to leave because not just his house, but the entire planet of Earth is going to be demolished to make way for a new hyperspace bypass. Essentially, the Earth is getting demolished to make a highway. So Ford Prefect takes Arthur Dent and they end up leaving planet Earth and hitchhiking on a passing spaceship. And this book is a wild time. So we follow Arthur Dent and all of the strange and wacky and absolutely absurd adventures that he ends up going on through this book and the remaining books in the series. And this book is just like my comfort read. I read this for the first time back in high school, and I reread it every couple of years. And there's something about it that just holds such a special place in my heart, and it just feels so good for me to go back and reread it. It's such a fun time, and it's filled with very interesting ideas, while never taking itself too seriously, or really that seriously at all. I don't really know what more I can say about this that hasn't been said, because again, this is a classic. But if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you pick this up. It's extremely accessible, the writing style is very easy to read, and everything that happens in it is completely absurd and wacky and wonderful anyway, so it doesn't even really matter. But this series generally explores so many interesting ideas, and there's so many wonderful quotable moments in it, and it just makes my heart so happy to go back and reread these. I love this series. Favorite book of all time. So I'm not gonna do it right now because it's like 2 pages, but if you're not 100% sold on this book already, go online and find the prologue, or the first 2 pages of the book, and that really sets the tone for the entirety of the book and the whole series. It's also very short. My edition of it is only 180 pages, and I have all 5 of them in these editions, so it's pretty easy to blow through, and I so recommend that you read this if you haven't already. I love it. It's so good. Alright, so those were my top 5 favorite books of all time. If you guys have read any of these books, please comment down below about them. I love talking about all 5 of these so much. But other than that, if you want to keep up with what I'm reading, I've got a link to my Goodreads in the description below, but that's all I've got for you guys today. Bye!